Let me just repeat the rules real quick. Please keep your microphone muted because we have a lot of people here. Okay, and if you have a question, please type it into the chat room. We will follow the chat room and somebody will answer the questions you have, okay? So we have here today from Kennedy Space Center, Dr. Gioia Massa. She is the lead scientist for the veggie system. We have here Jacob Torres. You all have his peppers, hopefully planted by now. And then we have here Trent Smith, but I do not know his new title. So Trent, you need to update me on that.
I'm the Technology Transfer Officer at Kennedy Space Center. So I joined the team that gets all the NASA technologies out to companies and industry, you may know them as spin-offs. So things that we invent for space and aerospace and exploration sometimes have applications here on Earth, and our team gets them out.
Oh, that's cool. You always have this annual publication about spin-offs, right?
Yep, that's our team that does that, yep.
That's a really cool stuff. If you can check that out, it's really neat.
Yep.
Okay.
But, space plants is still kind of, my side fun since, kind of a passion.
Okay, thank you so much, Trent. So, Gioia, can you give us a little bit of a status right now, how you guys are working? And we just talked about it a little bit.
Sure. So, since mid-March, like the rest of you, we've been kind of disrupted at Kennedy Space Center. And so we are working mostly remotely. You saw Trent's son in the back there cleaning the pool at his house right now. And so we're working from home most of the time. A lot of the plant experiments were shut down in May. But then starting around August, September, we were able to restart some of the research. And so we have what we've characterized as mission critical activities going on. And these do include the pepper testing that we're doing and new crop selection, because all of these are really critical to enable future missions. So for that research, Jacob and some of our other team members who are really very actively involved in the plant care are going in and setting up experiments. We try to keep very, very few people on site so that there's much less chance for contamination and spread of disease. And so we have daily meetings with the team to see who will be going and make sure there won't be too many people in a given space and make sure that everybody can work safely. But it's a real team effort, and we're just grateful to be back and be able to do some things. I think a lot of us were growing plants in our houses and waiting to get some experiments going again soon. On the space station right now, we just had a new crew arrive last week, and we had the crew that had been up there for a while depart and arrive back on Earth last night. And or maybe this morning, I'm not sure. And then we have the new crew going up on the SpaceX rocket scheduled to launch for November 11th. So they'll join the two cosmonauts and the astronaut Kate Rubins, who are on the ISS up there. In November, we'll have 4 additional astronauts. So that'll be like the most astronauts that we've had. And we're really, really excited about that, because that means there'll be a lot more time to do science. We have the veggie pillows sitting on the space station just waiting for them to grow. We have 4 sets of veggie plant pillows, 4 different experiments up there waiting for them to grow. So we're really excited to get the extra crew up there and get growing. And just so everybody's aware, on November 2nd, we're going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of having the International Space Station in orbit, permanently manned. So that's a really big, exciting thing. We've had people living and working in space for 20 years, just in a week or so. So that's the update.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So you all have planted your pepper plants, I hope, by now. Inside, outside, especially the Florida schools. And you are going to do a pollination experiment with the peppers. So Gioia or Jacob, can you please explain a little bit why this is so important, the pollination?
Well, I think that's a great question that Jacob can answer.
Thank you, Gioia. I appreciate it. You know, of course, we've talked about the crops that we're going to grow in space, and we've done leafy greens and other things. And pollination is well, there aren't bees in space, so we need to pick plants that are self-pollinating or easy to pollinate. Now, when it comes to these peppers, specifically, do they need to be pollinated? Do we need to tap the flowers and have the crew go in and tap the flowers, or come up with a method to shake them to pollinate them? Or some of you are testing not shaking them or tapping them at all. You know, maybe they are self-pollinating and they don't need to be tapped. So it's real important, the work that you're doing, because it ultimately leads into the amount of crew time that we're setting aside to pollinate and grow the peppers. So it's a great test.
Awesome.
Yeah, and with all the different fruit crops that we're looking at. So we're looking at things like peas as well, and tomatoes, and this is really going to help answer questions for all of these crops. We will understand better how pollination works in peppers on the ground, and then we'll be able to do the testing in spaceflight and see how it works up there. So we're really excited to see the results. I know I'm working more on tomatoes, and pollination was another question that we had for those as well. Will there be enough just air movement, or will there be will we have to have the astronauts manually intervene? So definitely curious about that.
Okay, thank you so much. I sent you guys some questions beforehand, which I received from one of the teachers. Lisa or Margaret, do you want to just post those questions again? Oh, okay, they must, there's Lisa.
Okay, Mario, I think Mario has those questions. Why don't you ask the astronauts?
Okay.
Oh yeah, NASA scientist.
Okay, you want me to read the questions? Okay.
No, Margaret, you can ask those questions. I think you are unmuted.
Yeah, so my first two questions are, how does your nutrient delivery system work, and what type of nutrients go through the system?
So I think, Jacob, if you want to talk a little bit about, the water and nutrient delivery testing that we've got, and maybe, highlight the APH, but also talk about the other things you're working on, I think that would be really interesting.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Gioia. So if we're talking specifically about PHO4 and growing peppers, the nutrient solution is actually not a nutrient solution, but it's a time-release fertilizer in a specific recipe that we've made for the peppers. And in the APH, it's essentially the pillow of the APH is the science carrier, and the science carrier is broken up into 4 quadrants. And inside there, you fill it up with the growth media and then the NutriCoat or the time-release fertilizer mixed in with the media. And someone like me or TechShot will get that media and pack it in to the science carrier, put wicks on top of them, and then screw the media in, the lids on top to hold the media and everything in there. So as you add water to that media over the grow out, the fertilizer releases and the plant absorbs it and uses it to grow. So that's how the APH works in the science carrier works, but it's also a lot, very much like the pillow works as well. The veggie pillow also uses media. and has a time-release fertilizer. In general, that fertilizer is specifically made for whatever crop you happen to be growing at that time. And I hate to say, and it's not just add water and walk away, but you know, for like a veggie pillow, a crew member or an astronaut will physically walk up and inject water into the pillow. And the advanced plant habitat, there's an automatic irrigation system where you can set the settings based off of a certain moisture setting that you would like, and the APH will deliver that amount of moisture for you over time, and you just need to check in on it from time to time, and it's really cool. And then, of course, we're working on other things here in the lab. Hydroponics would be great to do in space, but without gravity, there's a lot of challenges to using hydroponics. So we have to kind of come up with a system that will work minus gravity, but will still grow the plants that we want, the way we want to. And I think it kind of goes into a second question that was here, that was in this email, but that goes into the porous tubes. One system that we are looking at is the porous tube nutrient delivery system. And the quick story about that, but I read about this system when I was at Purdue, and there's these awesome papers, and Dr. Thomas Dreschel was the one who wrote them. And I was like, oh, it'll be so cool to go to Kennedy Space Center and work on the PTNDS. And well, guess what? I got to work with Thomas Dreschel on the PTNDS system. And I asked him the same question, why use porous tubes? And ultimately what he said, his answer was, you know, when you're looking for ways to create irrigation in microgravity, there's a big challenge. You kind of have to try anything. And he said, you know, we had these biofilters, these porous tube filters. They would seep water out, just enough water safe for a plant to live and grow on it, but not too much where it escapes into the environment. And so he connected a pump to it, recirculated water, and essentially created a hydroponic system candidate for microgravity. We haven't tested it in space yet, but those are the kinds of things that we're testing with to ultimately take automatic irrigation and hydroponics up to the ISS.
Jacob, you used a couple of abbreviations. Can you just define again the term? Yeah.
Yes, okay, I am so sorry. I'm so used to that. But the PTNDS is the porous tube nutrient delivery system. And that was one that was made in the 80s and 90s by Dr. Tom Dreschel and all of his team. And then when I came in as an intern, I got to work with him, and we created the passive porous tube nutrient delivery system. And that's another system that I got to work on as an intern and now as a scientist.
Thank you.
And Marion, I see there's a question in the chat, so this might be a good time for, you know, if there's been a lot of hydroponic research done in space, you know, so just so everybody's kind of on the same page, you know, what is hydroponics? Hydroponics basically means growing without soil. And there's a lot of different ways you can do hydroponics. You can do hydroponics with a substrate that you're not getting nutrition from, okay? So if you use a clay or a gravel or a sand, technically that's hydroponics. It's just called substrate hydroponics, but you're not getting the nutrition from that substrate. You would get it from the fertilizer solution. Or you can do hydroponics just with a water solution with no substrate. And so there's a lot of flavors and variations on this. We can think of aeroponics. Some of you have probably heard of aeroponics. That's misting nutrient solution through like a mist nozzle that sprays it onto the roots. If you've ever gotten to go to Epcot Center, you might see that in the land. I always loved that. That was one of my favorite theme parks to go to and to see. So there's a lot of different ways that you can grow plants that fall under the category of hydroponics. And if we're thinking about what we're doing in space, we have to really concern ourselves with how the fluids behave and getting the water and the nutrients to the plant roots, but also the air to the plant roots. So there have been some experiments that are kind of variations on hydroponics, and even veggie is kind of a variation on hydroponics. It's using a baked clay, but the plants aren't getting the nutrients from the clay, just like Jacob said, they're getting the nutrients from the controlled release fertilizer, the fertilizer solution, or the fertilizer pellets, you know, dissolve the nutrients into the water solution. And so there's a lot of different things that NASA is currently looking at. We're working with microgravity fluid physicists. These are the people that figure out how to get fluids to move without gravity. And they're helping us design different types of systems that we can test to grow plants in space. So we're hoping to test some of these with fake plants. They're like cut out of felt, essentially, but they move water in a similar way that plants do. And then, you know, if it works well with the fake plants on the small scale, we'll be able to test these on a larger scale with real plants. So in the next year or so, we're going to have a lot more information on hydroponics in space.
Great, thank you. There's a question to you, Gioia, about the last crop which was grown in space, successfully grown.
Yeah, yep, and Trent's totally right. It was Mizuna Mustard was the most recent crop. We grew that last year, so we actually haven't really grown any plants in space this year. There were some tests with red lettuce, but there were some challenges, and the seeds just didn't germinate very well this year, and so that test has to be rerun. So Mizuna Mustard was tested and grew really well. We did that twice last year, and actually the astronauts did the final harvest last Thanksgiving. So that was a pretty exciting way to eat and celebrate their holiday, I think. Starting in about, actually exactly 1 week, they're going to be growing radishes on the space station. So this is an experiment in the advanced plant habitat. And this is an investigator from the University of Louisiana, Dr. Carl Hassenstein, who wanted to look at how radishes grew and their microbiology and how their molecular biology, how their genes respond also to growing in space. So that'll be a really interesting experiment. That's in our larger chamber, the same one that will be growing the peppers in the advanced plant habitat.
Do you know by any chance the cultivar they are using?
I don't actually have that information. I'm sorry. I know that it's a red radish. It's not one of the rainbow ones, but I don't. I know we've done a lot of testing with one called Cherry Bomb, but unfortunately that cultivar is no longer available from the seed catalogs. So yeah, I don't know which one they ended up selecting. It may be Cherry Bell, which is a closely related cultivar, but I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. We had another question here about how do air and water mix in the media, in the pillows, if water is behaving so strangely in microgravity.
I think that's a great Trent question.
I can try. So the crew typically will inject water directly into the pillows, and we do put some water in the water reservoir. So the bottom of the pillow is it's a fabric, and the top of the root mat is also fabric. So the idea, the reservoir, is to get wicking to the pillow. It's a little inconsistent, maybe doesn't work the best, and so we really rely on the crew to really water the plants. And so with our ground controls and ground testing, we try to look at the size of the plant and figure out what their rate of consumption of water is. And we try to match that. Now, sometimes we're a little over and we'll see maybe water, stress in the plant from flooding, or maybe we'll see water come out of the wicks or the top of the pillow. Other times, maybe we're a little under and we'll spot some wilting. So it's really difficult to get the watering just right. But inside, with all that baked clay, the idea with the clay is to trap air and water at the same time. But in microgravity, if you put too much water in, you're going to have a big blob of water. The nice thing about the pillows is that it does have that fabric on the bottom, so the water, theoretically can go down into the root mat. But I think what we normally see is it will usually stay in there. It can evaporate out of the wicks. I mean, not the wicks, I'm sorry, the threads of the pillows, because we do see some salt built up there sometimes. But ultimately, I think if you overdo it, you get a slog of water and you get flood stress. And if you underdo it, well, you got a little bit of a drought. So we spend a lot of time looking at photos, trying to decide as a team how much water to put into the pillows. And I know Gioia and Jess and all the science team, you know, Saturdays, Sundays, we were looking at all the photos and trying to figure that out.
Thank you, Trent. I know it's complicated. And we have another question here.
But in some ways, it's kind of simple, almost like at home. You don't know how much water's in your pot, but at least you can pick it up. In space, you're depending on looking at the plant and running calculations.
We have another question here. Do plants that grow underground, I guess that means radishes, do better than plants that grow above the ground?
Yeah, well, I'll start that one, and I'm sure Jacob and Trent can chime in. You know, so interestingly, when we've been doing the radishes, the bulb part of the radish, which is a storage root, it actually forms above the ground. The rest of the roots are below ground, but it's lucky for us that we actually form the radish kind of on top of, you know, the plant pillow or the root tray for the advanced plant habitat. And the reason it's lucky is right now, because we're using this baked clay in these plant pillows or in these root trays, we don't really have a way to open that up to get those rooting root zone crops like a carrot out in space without clay particles going everywhere. And that wouldn't be good because they'd just float into astronauts' eyes and into machinery and cause all sorts of problems. So we actually don't have a good mechanism to grow root zone crops in space. That's one of the things that we're looking at for hydroponic systems. And one of our former interns worked with Jacob to try to develop a root zone crop system with the porous ceramic tubes. But right now we're really focused on growing leafy crops and some of the small fruit crops. The other challenge with root crops is that when you're growing in contact with water, so even something like a radish that is close to the surface of the ground and it has a lot of water on it, that means you get a lot of microorganisms growing on it. When you're farther away, like a leaf, you get fewer microorganisms. And when you're up even above the surface pretty far, like a tomato fruit, you get very, very few microorganisms. But when you're close to the water, you get a lot more. And we don't have a good way to clean those off. So for now in space, we use sanitizing wipes, and the astronauts will get like a Ziploc bag, you know, with these wipes inside, layers of wipes, like sheets of paper, and they're wet. And they put leaves in between the layers of the wipes, and then they press them and they hold them. And that's how they sanitize their produce. It's very time consuming. They don't like doing it very much. And so we haven't come up with a way to sanitize the root crops, because the thing about radishes and carrots and those other types of crops, they actually have a lot of nooks and crannies on the surface. We call that surface architecture, which means there's a lot of places for bacteria and fungi to grow and to hide. And it's not so easy to just clean the surface, because you can clean the surface, but you're not getting all the nooks and crannies. And so there are still a lot of microorganisms on them. So until we come up with a good way to clean those types of produce and a good way to grow them, we're probably not going to be growing them in space anytime soon, or eating them in space. In the case of the radishes, they do grow slightly above the tray, but we don't have approval yet for them to eat them in space because of that surface architecture. So there's some challenges there, but those would be great things for y'all to think about. Think about ways that you can grow and remove root crops without everything floating away and making a huge mess.
Cool, thank you. We have a little bit of 3 questions here, which are going a little bit into growing plants in space history. Can you, Trent or Jacob, tell us a little bit about that? When was the first crop planted, and which kind of crops were planted? Not only veggie, but maybe also some others.
I certainly defer to Trent on that one, but it's an excellent question. It's so cool.
So I think plants have been grown in space for decades. The first flower that was attempted was I think it was an orchid, and it grew pretty well. It was the Russians that tried to grow it, but it never flowered. I think the first flower that actually grew in space was in the 70s, and it was our good friend Arabidopsis thaliana. All the plant scientists know that one, and if you're not sure what that is, it's sort of the mouse if you're a plant scientist. Genome has been sequenced, and you can get all these different mutations to figure out different plant biochemistry and mechanisms. After that, I want to, boy, I wish Ray was on here. Ray could tell you all about it, but the Russians had equipment called Lada, so they've grown, I think, peas and Mizuna even. I don't know, Joy, what else have they grown in space before we put veggie on? You remember?
Yeah. Well, even before the space station, they actually had a plant greenhouse on the Mir space station, which was the old Russian space station, called Svet. And so they grew Mizuna and they grew lettuce there. They've also grown barley in Lada. And that was pretty exciting because, you know, a lot of people may know that barley can be used to make beer. And so I think they actually brought some beer or barley back and made some beer out of it. There's been wheat grown in space. The biomass production chamber, which was another plant growth chamber that came before veggie on the space station. We had investigators that grew wheat as well. So there've been a wide variety. And then, you know, in veggie, we've, like I said, done a lot of leafy crops, and we also did the zinnias. And the zinnias were the first flower that NASA has grown in the veggie, you know, and the first kind of ornamental flower. There's also been a plant, small plant, not quite as small as Arabidopsis, but it's called rapid cycling Brassica. And so this is a small little plant that grows flowers and produces seeds very quickly. So you could do what are called seed to seed experiments, where you grow seeds and then you grow the next generation of seeds to see if spaceflight affected the plants. And the Russians also did that with the pea plants that they grew. So there have been quite a lot of plant experiments. Some have been successful, some have not been so successful. But, you know, I think the astronauts generally really enjoy growing the plants.
Thank you, Gioia. If anybody is interested in this article from Ray Wheeler, your teacher can contact me. I have it and I can send it out to you. It's really cool. It goes through the whole history of growing plants in space. It's a really neat article. And then we have the ultimate mold question, Gioia. We gave out now this 100% organic material, the peat moss. So that looks a little bit different than actually the clay.
Yeah, and you know, so mold. So there's a couple questions I see here. You know, did we get mold, and you know, can the plant still get diseases? Yes, the answer is definitely yes. And we're still working on this. Trent talked about how watering is so difficult and how we're always kind of going between flood and drought. And if we go more towards the flood side of things, or if we have problems with air movement, which we had when we had the zinnias, we get mold in the plants. And so when you have this excess water, there's just spores on the space station. There are spores in the air. You know, we're Florida right now, there are a lot of spores in the air here. You know, when people have allergies in the summer, the winter, the fall, right? A lot of it is due to fungi and molds. And so these are in the air on the space station as well. They're things that we try to prevent, not bring to space. But because we clean the hardware and we try to keep everything very clean, but the astronauts themselves may have spores in their lungs that they breathe out, right? Or, you know, they have associated microorganisms that just go up with them. And there are things that are on the hardware that we just, you know, we can't eliminate everything. And so when that environment gets what we call off nominal, which basically means out of whack, since the plants are no longer very happy, then you'll have these problems like disease and fungus. So we have to be very diligent in checking the photographs that we're getting and making sure that things look really healthy. If we see signs of disease, we ask the astronauts to remove those plants and get rid of them because we don't want it to spread. And we also, you know, just try to make sure that the environment stays in the right range to keep plants happy and healthy. But all that's really, really hard, even on Earth, and it's much harder in space. And, you know, when you're using organic material, like the peat plugs that you're using, you know, they're really great for a lot of reasons. You can send them dry, you can hydrate them just like you did. They tend to grow plants really well. Plants like the nutrients, they like the pH, they like the characteristics of that peat material, but so does fungus sometimes, you know, and algae. And if you have too much water or too much light or maybe not enough airflow or any number of situations, maybe just being in a room that has a lot of spores, you will get some of that growing on that material surface. We're not using the organic material for spaceflight. We use the baked clay that Jacob talked about, the arsenite. That's mostly because having that inert, inorganic clay helps to reduce that microbial load that I talked about, the bacteria and the fungus that are on the leaves. And also because sometimes it has to just sit up there for years and years and years. And some of the peat-based media, when they dry out, they can be very difficult to re-wet. Whereas the clay, you can re-wet it very easily, even if it's been sitting dry for years and years and years. So that's why we're not using the more organic materials in spaceflight right now. But eventually we are going to have to learn to do that and learn to take your not edible portions of your plants, so your leaves and stems and roots of your pepper plant, you're not going to eat those, right? You're going to eat the peppers. So what do we do with the rest of it? Well, we have to figure out how to recycle that to grow the next set of peppers, because we can't be bringing all the fertilizer and nutrients from Earth to Mars, you know, or the moon, right? So we need to understand what's the best way to recycle those materials. And so ultimately we are going to be using a lot more organic materials like you're using right now to grow plants, because the peat pellets are very similar in a lot of ways to compost that you might get if you composted the plant material. So those are all things that we have to figure out. But yeah, you will sometimes get slimy stuff growing on your surface. As the plant gets big and it blocks the light and it takes up more and more water, and the roots take up more and more nutrients, it will sort of outcompete the things that are growing on the surface of the peat. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, but you can also scrape that off if it starts to be something that you're concerned about. You can take a little teaspoon and just scrape the top of the surface to keep it clean.
I want to jump in real quick while we're on the conversation of peat, and it's related to growing peppers, in fact. And we have a joke, Lachelle and I have a joke in the lab that the Jiffy pots, which are made out of peat, are Jacob's kryptonite. And it's really more a kryptonite for peppers if you don't use them the right way. But peat can become very compact and hold a lot of water. And when that happens, if your seeds are planted even just a millimeter or two too far down, they may never come out, or they may take 2 to 3 weeks to come out, and you'll start to think, oh, they're not growing, and you'll want to move on. And so the thing to be very careful on, and actually I went through the GVE on the posts. Everybody's posts on Twitter are just amazing. They're just so wonderful. And I have seen a lot of fluffed up peat, not too compact, not too dry and not too wet. But if you are having, germination problems while using your peat, just keep an eye on fluffing it up. Make sure that it's not too wet and it's not too compact. And that's the secret to using it.
Thank you, Jacob. And I also saw the tomato strawberry questions on the chat. The next crops which could be grown in space, can you tell us something about them? Why or why not strawberries or tomatoes at this point?
Well, I can tackle that one briefly. So we are planting tomatoes. We've looked at a dwarf variety called Red Robin, and they're only about, that tall. And we've looked at other dwarf varieties as well, but that was the one we liked the best. And so we are planning to grow this in veggie. We've had some challenges with the hardware. And so, Jacob is growing peppers in the advanced plant habitat. And like he said, it's a very automated, highly controlled system where people on the ground, like Jacob, will be able to monitor and inject water and control the environment just from the ground. So it's a really wonderful tool, and it doesn't require a lot of astronaut manual attention to the plants, right? So Jacob can do most of it from his computer. And so that's really great, because when you have to have the astronauts manually going and adding water every day, that takes a huge amount of time, and they just don't have that much time. They're so busy on the space station, keeping the space station going, doing a huge variety of science experiments, cleaning, exercising, all the things that we have to do where we live. And so they don't have that much time. And so for the tomatoes, we're growing them in veggie, but the current veggie situation with the plant pillows means that for tomatoes, you would have to water them pretty much every day. And unlike lettuce, which you can grow for 30 days or so, tomatoes are a lot more like peppers. They're going to take 100, 105 days to grow and to produce fruit and flower. And so that's a really long time commitment for the astronauts and for the experiment. So the options are to either grow them in something like the advanced plant habitat, or to develop a new type of hardware for veggie that will be less crew labor intensive. And so that's what we've been doing for the tomatoes. But so far we haven't gotten that to work yet. So that's why we're still waiting on growing these tomatoes. Everything is a process. It takes time, and it's not easy in space. Strawberries are a very interesting one. I've done a lot of work with strawberries in the past. We all like to eat strawberries, or most of us like to eat strawberries. They're not quite as much fun to grow in some ways when you're growing them in an indoor environment. I just remember they had these very itchy hairs on the stems and the leaves. So if you're working with them, if you're pollinating them, you were just always itchy from the little plant hairs on them. But they grow very well indoors and in controlled environments. The challenge for space is they don't grow from seeds. If you're growing strawberries, you grow them from cuttings, from small rooted plants. It can either just be a little bit of a stem with some roots, or it can be, what's called a runner. The strawberry plant sends a shoot out from the side, and it'll make a new little plant at the end of that. But you have to have this living plant, not this dormant seed. Seeds are still alive, but they're dormant. But the strawberry plants themselves are not dormant. And it's a challenge to make them that way. It can be done. But right now we don't have a really great approach to bringing what we call clonal materials to space. So clonal materials means things that are reproducing without seeds, like you know, cuttings. Cuttings would be clones. This is how you reproduce, you know, a lot of plants in your yard. You might take a cutting, let it root, and then put it into the ground. Potatoes are a great example of a clonal food crop, because you can cut the potato up, and as long as you have an eye on the piece of the potato that you cut, you can grow a new potato plant from that. But you don't grow potatoes from seed most of the time. And same with strawberries. So right now, because, you know, we have such a challenge in getting enough time for the astronauts to grow the plants, we like to do everything from seed and then be able to have those seeds stored on the space station so that when they have time to grow them, the seeds, the dormant plants, can be, you know, started, and they can add water and start. But some of these seeds may be sitting around for a year or two before they have an opportunity to grow them, and you can't do that with plants like strawberries. So that's why they're not on the front burner right now, but we are going to look at them.
Thank you, Gioia. I like strawberries a lot. And we grew them. We grew them in one of our growth chambers, but I understand with the cutting, it's going to be very, very difficult. There was another question somewhere here about sunlight. Can you explain to the students the veggie cap? Why is the light purple, and how did this all come together?
Yeah, Trent, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, I was stuffing my face.
If you want, I can do it while you're chewing.
Well, you know, you saw Jackson in the background, and he's big. I'm competing for resources. If I don't get to the food's gone. So, yes, so sunlight versus LEDs. You know, plants don't know if a photon is natural or made by a light bulb, but they do notice the wavelengths and intensity and the photoperiod. So a lot of times for plants, you just need red and blue at the most basic. A lot of plants, not all. And so photosynthesis is a lot of times driven by red, and then blue can drive some of the other processes, some of the biochemistry and things like that. You know, the more we learn about LED light wavelengths, we can kind of tune algorithms to change what the plant will do. Actually, Gioia just completed a study with Mizuna on space station looking at that very thing, is the light algorithms and how plants can respond. And maybe when I'm done talking, you can talk a little bit about the Mizuna experiment. But we've met a number of plant scientists from companies that are growing the same plants, and they're giving the plants different light algorithms. And at the end of the growth cycle, the plants look completely different. They taste completely different. And you can bet that they have different mineral and vitamin composition. So the photons that you give a plant, the energy of the photon is basically the wavelength, and then the intensity is the number of photons you throw at it. And so the plants are plastic in their growth. They will change their shape, they will change their chemistry, their flavor, a number of things based on just the light. If everything's the same and you give them different light, you'll end up with different plants at the end. Well, think about this as a toolbox if you're growing plants. You can have maybe similar plants or the same plants and give them different light recipes and end up with different vitamin composition. You can maybe customize vitamins for certain astronauts. You can customize flavors for certain astronauts, perhaps. You know, but you got to be able to grow the plants reliably, get the watering down, fertilizer, and all that. So, but the lighting is very important for plants. I mean, it's what they use to create energy, essentially. Gioia, did you want to take a sec and talk about the Mizuna?
Yeah, sure. So you get more food. So we did test, and we had in two different, you know, colors of light in veggies. So one was what we call red rich. So it was like 90% red light, 30% blue light, plus a little bit of green. And the other was 50-50 red and blue, plus the same amount of green. And we wanted to see, you know, does this light quality, this spectral quality impact the plant growth and the yield and the nutrients? And what we found is it was pretty similar on spaceflight as it was on Earth. So that's great, because that means we can do all this testing on Earth and see the effects of light, and then it'll translate pretty well into space as long as we keep our plants healthy and happy up there. So far, that's what our data show. When we grow the tomatoes, we're going to do the same experiment with the different red to blue light ratios. But as Trent said, light's really, really important for plants. You know, plants, they can't run away, right? So they have to deal with whatever their environment is giving them at any given spot. And so plants have a lot of amazing strategies to deal with light, because they're, you know, they just are very, very dependent on it, and they're very adaptable. They're what we call plastic in their growth, because they can change their growth depending on their environment. So that's what plastic means in terms of the plant phenotype, the look of the plant, what you see of the plant. And so you know, for instance, if you go out in your yard, if you have a yard, or you go anywhere in a park and you look at leaves on a tree, if you look at the leaves on the tree that are in the sun, that are in the top of the tree, a lot of times those leaves are smaller and thicker. And then the leaves underneath, in the bottom of the tree, that are being shaded out by the rest of the tree, most of those leaves are going to be wider and thinner. Okay, that's an example of what we call phenotypic plasticity. That means that the plants change their leaf shape based on how much light they're getting. And it's amazing that they can do this. They can also change the chemicals in the leaves, the nutrients in the leaves, the pigments, the colors of the leaves. And so light can have all these interesting responses on plants. We have a colleague at the University of Florida who has studied different colors of light, and he has shown that with one plant, you can make it look like a mixed salad of, you know, when you buy that spring blend or whatever at the grocery store, with some leaves that are reddish, some that are green, some that are big and flat, some that are small. You can do all of that with just one type of plant based on the colors of light and the intensity of light that you can give it. So light's really, really important for shaping a plant. And so we're interested to see how we can make the plants taste better, how we can make them more nutritious, and how we can make them, you know, grow bigger. You want all of those things, right, for space plants. You also want low microbial levels on the leaves. So we're working on figuring out how to do all of this, but obviously you might get something that makes a bigger plant, but maybe it'll be less nutritious, right? So which of those is better? Do you want a bigger plant or do you want a more nutritious plant? You want both, right? So how do you get everything? Well, that's the challenge. That's why we do a lot of research in this area. And there are a lot of people around the world doing research, and we look at what they're doing as well, because we have a really small group and we have, you know, a lot of projects to do. So we refer to what we call the scientific literature, which is all the scientists around the world who are studying light and plants. And because we have tools like LED lighting, like the lights in veggie, where we can do the select colors, now we can start to really tease apart this and really understand what's going on. So it's still a very active area of research, and we're still learning a lot.
You know, Gioia, I want to jump in real quick is about lighting as related to our experiment, what everybody's doing at home or in your classroom. And I noticed that we are growing peppers in the window, and that's totally awesome. It's completely awesome. But I'm realizing, looking at your pictures, that the time of the year is changing. The angle of the sun is actually becoming lower. It could be possible that a tree can be in the way of your sunlight for a portion of the day, and it's possible that your pepper plants may not get enough sunlight through the window. So maybe we want to avoid trying to go out and buying equipment, but maybe think about the possibility of having to supplement your plant with a little bit of extra light, especially when it comes to fruiting or around the time they start flowering and fruiting. And I've been successful, you know, you definitely want to use a south-facing window, a window that is facing towards the sun or gets most of the sun. Even a west or east window will help, but maybe a north window, you won't get as much light. But when you get to fruiting and you don't start to see peppers coming out the way you would like them to be, it could be as simple as getting a regular incandescent light bulb, which I've been very successful with. I had an old desk lamp with a light bulb in it, and I got an 80-watt light bulb and added it on top of with the sunlight also onto the plant, and that was enough supplement to give me some fruit. So as you guys are growing and as you're growing your pepper plants, if you notice that you're not developing fruit, and I know this is a little bit later down the road, just start thinking about maybe I might need to supplement a little bit of that light to help them to grow. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great, yeah, that's really a good point. Sorry, Marion, go ahead.
It's okay. Yes, same thing. It's a good point. And I had this question quite a few times. Of course, you can supplement, but I also want to add, if everything goes well and you are back in school and you have a classroom, at least partially, your class has a classroom, after winter break, we will send you a grow unit with an adjustable light. So you can actually check out the lights and see how veggie works. So do we have some more questions here? We have some amazement about what plants can do, which is great. We do not have any more new questions.
Well, maybe we can talk a little bit more about light and some of the interesting things that we're seeing with peppers. So I don't know, Jacob, if you want to talk anything about what you and Lachelle have been doing with the different colors of light with the peppers.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll mention real quick that my work sister, who I get to work with, her name is Lachelle Spencer, and she runs all the horticulture stuff in the labs, in the ground labs here at Kennedy Space Center. And I pretty much follow her around and help her with anything she needs with her experiments. And that's pretty much my job, but it's a lot of fun. And one thing that Lachelle is doing is she's doing crop selection with peppers, as well as the PHO4 work, where we're growing peppers in the Advanced Plant Habitat EDU, and that's the ground unit of the Advanced Plant Habitat. So we're growing peppers all over the place. And what we're learning is environment and lighting are very important to growing a healthy pepper in a controlled environment. If Trent mentioned the sun and the LEDs, and a plant doesn't know the difference between photons, but it does know the difference between the amount of intensity and even frequency that it's getting. And that's something that Lachelle is working into. We're seeing things on the peppers like something called intumescence, and it kind of like cakes the leaves and the plant, and we're learning that it makes the peppers look really ugly, and in many ways could be a cause of not enough lighting and some environmental issues. But a lot of peppers, our peppers in particular, are working really well and growing really well under those tough conditions. But ultimately where I'm going is that environment and lighting is very important to your experiment. And going into, some of the posts that I saw, this week, everybody's doing really well. There's a lot of really good growth going through the really pretty plants. I don't see any variation from the ones that I'm growing in Greenworks or at home. You guys are all on a very good path. But
hey, Jacob, why don't you take a moment and talk about all the plants that failed? All the ones that have intumescence. I mean, we went through a ton of pepper plants. Some of them, grew big and bushy, but a lot of them really did not like the LED light.
And that's right. Part of crop selection is to grow as many cultivars as you can in a high CO2 environment or a simulated space station environment, so we can see how they grow down here before we send them up to space. And essentially, you want to narrow down to one that would grow great, or that we think will grow great in an ISS environment. And along the way, we have grown dozens, literally. I think we're up to 20 different peppers that we've grown. So at least 24 peppers. And out of those, 20 or so peppers that we've grown, 6 of them have actually flowered and provided peppers that you could pick and eat or harvest and do things with. So not every pepper will grow in a controlled environment is what we're learning. And it very much has a lot to do with the lighting, because we can't, add the nutrients. We can give nutrients. We can supply a great environment, temperature, humidity, and stuff. Where is the deficit? The primary deficit is in the lighting. It's not the sun. The LEDs have just some things that the sun do not have, some spectrums that the sun does not have, and not all peppers grow well under that condition. And in the end, out of all those peppers that we've grown, a lot of them have failed, and it's led to just a very select few that are growing well in those environments.
Yeah, a lot of times we think it's ultraviolet light and getting the level of ultraviolet light correct, or it could be other wavelengths like far red light that certain types of plants may just need. So we're still working on that and figuring all that out. So I think there was another question if we've experimented with different types of nutrients for plants, and this is definitely something we've done some research on. And as Jacob said, he came up with a formulation for the peppers of fertilizers that would work well. Again, every plant's different. The leafy greens, we have different nutrients. All plants need the same 16 or so nutrients to grow. Okay, there's a memorization tool you can memorize to learn those, which I learned when I was your age. And it tells you all of the different nutrients you need. The big 3 are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the big 3 you get from fertilizer. You get some of the other ones, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, from the air and the water. But the ratio, the proportion of the nutrients that the plants need differs. It differs by plant type, and it differs by the way you're growing them. And so everybody who grows, even if you're growing the exact same plant type, but under different situations, they may need different levels of nutrients. So again, it's a lot of research, a big question. We work with the company Floracan that developed the time-release fertilizer that you guys are using, and they help us and give us advice on things to try, and then we test it out. In every situation, we may need a slightly different concentration of nutrients.
Thank you, Gioia. This whole nutrient and fertilizer section is can be a half-year-long lecture if you want to go into detail, but it's definitely really interesting, and we are planning a fertilizer trial for you guys in the second half of this year. Okay.
Marion, can I answer one question that's in the chat?
Sure.
Very quick. It just, how long will it take your pepper to come out? And you may see that in general, they take 7 to 8 days, but we are seeing cases where it'll take weeks, maybe 20 days, 21 days, and there's a big variation in there. And what I've learned is that variation is dependent on the media that the seed is planted in, how far down it's planted, and how it's watered. And so if if your plants don't come out for a long time, don't give up on them. They are working their way out in most cases.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I waited for one of my peppers for 4 weeks. So yes, it takes a long time. Be patient, guys. We have reached our 4 o'clock. If you still have questions, please keep them for the next time. We will have this chat again, but at 4 o'clock, I think on the 19th of November. October. Yes, on the 19th of November at 4 o'clock Eastern time, we will be back on. If you have questions beforehand, please send them to us. It makes it easier to prepare. And thank you all for being here today. And thanks a lot to Gioia, Jacob, and Trent, who are with us and guiding us through this program for what, the 6th year now, which is really, really cool. So thank you so much.